It started with the sound of glass breaking, a violent intrusion into the silence of night. A frail woman, startled awake, stood in her small bedroom, her mind racing to understand what was happening. Blood began to seep down her face as she faced a masked figure whose shadow loomed ominously on the wall. The stillness of Lafayette was shattered in the early hours of June 20, 1942. Inside her modest home, Mary Soller, a widow of 72 years, was roused from sleep by the harsh glare of light flooding her bedroom. In the adjoining room, her sister-in-law, Emma, also stirred from her slumber, confused and uneasy. Mary, her eyesight blurred by sleep, thought Emma might need help. Slowly, she swung her feet to the floor and rose. But she didn't see Emma. She saw him. The intruder moved without hesitation. A quart-sized glass milk bottle flew through the air, smashing into the side of Mary's head. The force of the blow sent her reeling, and the bottle ricocheted off the doorframe, shattering into shards that scattered across the floor. Blood trickled down Mary's temple, blending with the broken glass at her feet. Dazed and desperate, Mary reached into her belongings and retrieved two $20 bills. Her hands shook as she extended the cash toward the masked figure, silently begging him to leave. The man snatched the money and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind shattered glass, bloodstains, and terror. Mary survived the attack but was left with a painful head injury and deep emotional scars. As she recovered in the hospital, detectives scoured the crime scene for clues. What they discovered chilled them. The intruder hadn't forced his way in. He had used a skeleton key, a simple but sinister tool to unlock the front door without a sound. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. If a skeleton key could bypass the safety of locked doors, no home was truly secure. Residents began locking their windows and double-checking their doors, but the sense of safety they once felt had been shattered, just like the bottle that struck Mary Soller. For the Soller sisters, the nightmare had ended. But for Lafayette, it was only the beginning. The fear that gripped Lafayette after the attack on Mary Soller didn't fade, it only grew. 10 days later, the masked intruder struck again, this time with even greater malice. Frances Knopf, alone in her home, worked late into the night, her husband away on a night shift at the local factory. Her two young children slept soundly in their beds, their soft breaths a fragile reminder of innocence in a world turning dark. A noise interrupted her routine, a subtle but unmistakable sound from the front room. At first, she thought one of her children had woken. She placed the iron down carefully and moved toward the noise. Each step she took brought her closer to the lurking danger. The man struck without warning, emerging from the shadows like a nightmare come to life. His hand gripped a cold, steel .38 revolver, a weapon he had stolen from a nearby closet moments earlier. "Don't scream, or I'll kill you." Frances tried to stay calm, but fear coursed through her body. The man shoved her into another room, where he unleashed a brutal attack. His blows landed with cruel precision, leaving her battered and helpless. Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, the man vanished. The stolen revolver and watch were the only physical traces he left behind. 4 hours, Frances sat frozen in shock, too paralyzed by fear to move. When her screams finally pierced the morning air, neighbors rushed to her aid, finding her bruised and trembling. Detectives noted the chilling similarities between Frances's attacker and the man who had terrorized the Soller sisters. The description of the masked intruder matched perfectly, a faceless predator who struck without warning and disappeared into the night. But this time, they had a lead. The stolen Waltham watch was distinctive enough to be traced. Detectives knew the man would try to sell it, and they prepared to follow the trail. 6 days later, their hunch paid off. Detectives traced the watch to a man who had bought it unknowingly. From him, the trail led to the original seller. The pieces were coming together. The crimes, the fear, the shattered lives, all pointed to one individual. The net was tightening, but the masked intruder remained elusive. The town held its breath, wondering when the masked figure would strike again, or if he was already watching them from the shadows. Welcome to True Crime Daily Stories. Thank you to all our subscribers for your amazing support. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now to stay updated on more gripping true crime stories. Let's continue. By early July 1942, the town of Lafayette was suffocating under a storm of fear. The masked intruder's 6-week crime spree had broken the illusion of safety. But with a single headline, that fear gave way to relief and a new kind of shock. The culprits were not hardened criminals, but two teenage boys, Floyd Burton Loveless, aged 15, and his older brother, Robert K. Loveless, 17. The arrest marked the end of Lafayette's reign of terror, but it also raised troubling questions. How could two boys unleash so much chaos? The answers lay in the brothers' tragic past. On June 15, 1930, Floyd was just 3 years old when his mother, Hazel Loveless, stepped in front of a moving train. The newspapers at the time called it an accident, but whispers among neighbors suggested something darker. With their father constantly away for work on the railroad, Floyd and Robert were left to be raised by their grandmother in Clarks Hill, a quiet village 15 miles south of Lafayette. Clarks Hill was a place of endless fields and stifling silence, a town too small to hide from pain and loss. The brothers grew up under the shadow of their mother's death, their childhoods fractured by abandonment and grief. By their teenage years, trouble had found both boys. Robert's first brush with the law came in 1939 when he was convicted of motor vehicle theft. He served time at White's Indiana Manual Labor Institute, a juvenile facility with a harsh reputation. For Floyd, the descent into crime began even earlier. Just 7 months before their infamous spree, he was convicted for burglarizing a rural home near Lafayette. Though he served only 9 days in jail, it was enough to earn him a reputation among local authorities as a troublemaker. On June 2, 1942, the Loveless brothers left their grandmother's home in Clarks Hill, heading for Lafayette. What followed was a spree of crime so brazen that it left an indelible mark on the town. Burglaries, car theft, and even violent assaults, no act seemed beyond their reach. While Robert dabbled in shoplifting and petty theft, it was Floyd's reckless aggression that escalated their crimes. His escalating violence earned him a chilling nickname among law enforcement, Lafayette's John Dillinger. The break in the case came when detectives traced the stolen Waltham watch to a man who unknowingly purchased it for $3. From there, the trail led straight to Floyd and Robert. Their arrests were uneventful, no high-speed chases, no violent standoffs. Just two teenagers, pulled from obscurity and thrust into the public eye as the masterminds of Lafayette's nightmare. Floyd's confessions trickled out over the course of days. At first, he denied everything, his youthful bravado masking his fear. But the relentless pressure from detectives wore him down. Eventually, he confessed to all of it. "I threw the bottle. She gave me the money. I didn't mean to hurt her. I grabbed the gun. I told her to shut up. I just wanted her to stop screaming. We broke into the cars. It was easy. Nobody was watching." The sheer scope of their crimes was staggering. Floyd admitted to 2 brutal assaults, numerous burglaries, 20 counts of breaking into parked cars, and 3 motor vehicle thefts. For the people of Lafayette, the revelations were both a relief and a horror. The masked intruder who had haunted their streets was just a boy. But for Floyd Burton Loveless, the worst was yet to come. By mid-July 1942, Floyd Burton Loveless was no longer Lafayette's problem. The 15-year-old boy, now infamous for his role in the town's crime wave, had been sentenced to the Indiana Boys' School. The facility, labeled as a reform institution, bore little resemblance to its name. It was not a place of education or redemption, but a harsh environment where survival often depended on cunning and strength. The school spanned 1,300 acres, a sprawling expanse of barracks-like dormitories and farmland. Officially, it wasn't a prison. It lacked guard towers and fences, but its locked doors and wandering guards ensured most boys stayed inside. Those who didn't quickly learned the cost of freedom. Floyd, however, wasn't content to wait out his sentence. Exactly 30 days after his arrival, he made his move. Alongside another inmate, David Klein, also 15, Floyd slipped out under the cover of darkness. Their absence went unnoticed for 6 hours, a testament to the school's lackadaisical oversight. By the time anyone realized they were gone, Floyd and David were miles away. The escape wasn't just a flight from captivity, it was an act of defiance. For Floyd, the Indiana Boys' School represented the very system he loathed. He wasn't running toward freedom, he was running from the memories of confinement, the rules, and the punishments that had shaped his young life. Their journey westward was marked by a string of burglaries, each one more audacious than the last. They broke into homes, ransacked drawers, and stole whatever they could carry or sell. But it wasn't just money or food they were after. Floyd wanted something more. In one home, he found it, a revolver. That weapon became a symbol of power in Floyd's hands. It was no longer just about staying ahead of the law. The gun gave him a sense of control he had rarely felt in his short, tumultuous life. He kept it close, unaware that it would soon seal his fate. Floyd and David stole a car and followed the expansive stretch of U.S. Highway 40, a road that seemed to promise freedom and escape. They financed their journey with stolen goods and avoided major towns, sticking to backroads and isolated stops. But for all their efforts, the boys couldn't outrun the consequences of their actions. Every mile they traveled left a trail, a stolen car here, a burglarized home there. Law enforcement was closing in, and Floyd's stolen revolver was about to turn a simple escape into something far deadlier. Their path led them across state lines, further and further from Indiana. Yet every crime, every stolen item, brought them closer to the point of no return. The freedom Floyd sought was an illusion, one that would dissolve the moment he pulled the trigger. By late August 1942, Floyd Loveless and David Klein had traveled hundreds of miles, their path marked by stolen cars and burglarized homes. From Indiana to Nevada, the two boys had evaded capture, but their luck was running out. Near the remote outskirts of Elko, Nevada, their desperate flight took a deadly turn. It began with a single impulsive act, the theft of a truck. Floyd spotted it parked unattended, the keys still dangling in the ignition. Without hesitation, he climbed in and drove away. What Floyd didn't realize was that the truck belonged to Elmer Hill, the well-known manager of the Horseshoe Ranch in Dunphy, a man whose vehicle was instantly recognizable to locals. Word of the stolen truck quickly reached law enforcement, and Constable Adolph Burning of Carlin set out to intercept it. Burning wasn't just any officer. He was a veteran lawman, having served as the town's constable for 26 years. He was known for his calm demeanor and steady hand, a symbol of stability in the rural Nevada community. When Burning learned that Elmer Hill's truck was heading west along the Victory Highway, he parked his patrol vehicle by the roadside, waiting for it to appear. The midday sun beat down on the asphalt as the truck came into view, barreling toward him in a cloud of dust. Burning stepped into the road and signaled for the driver to stop. Floyd, behind the wheel, obeyed, perhaps thinking he could talk his way out of the situation. The truck rolled to a halt, and Burning approached the driver's side window. The encounter was brief and fatal. Burning calmly informed Floyd that he would need to accompany him to answer for driving a vehicle that wasn't his. But Floyd, armed with the revolver he had stolen during his escape, had other plans. Later, Floyd would recount what happened in that fateful moment. "I pulled out a gun and said I wouldn't go back with him," he confessed. What followed was a violent struggle. Burning, unarmed and unprepared for the confrontation, lunged for the weapon, grappling with Floyd inside the cramped truck cab. The revolver jammed, giving Burning a fleeting moment of advantage. But Floyd's desperation outweighed the constable's experience. He freed the weapon and pulled the trigger. The first shot struck Burning, but the fight wasn't over. As the two men wrestled again, Floyd fired a second shot. This time, Burning collapsed, gravely wounded. With Burning slumped across the seat, Floyd shoved the injured officer fully into the cab and climbed behind the wheel. The truck sped west along the highway, carrying the wounded constable and a young man whose actions had just crossed an irreversible line. Burning, barely conscious, moaned in pain. Floyd lied to him, claiming he was taking him to a hospital. But Floyd's only concern was escape. Further down the road, Floyd caught up with David Klein, who was waiting at Primo Station, a remote gas station in the middle of nowhere. Floyd abandoned the blood-stained truck, leaving Burning inside, and climbed into the Buick that Klein had stolen. Together, they sped off, leaving the constable to die in the Nevada heat. As they fled, Burning clung to life in the truck. For 36 agonizing hours, he fought against the injuries Floyd had inflicted. But the damage was too severe. Adolph Burning, a man who had dedicated nearly 3 decades to keeping his community safe, succumbed to his wounds. Floyd Loveless, once a runaway looking for freedom, was now a murderer. The crime that had started as a reckless escape had spiraled into an act of irreversible violence. With Burning's death, the manhunt for Floyd and Klein intensified. Their flight had reached its boiling point, and the Nevada desert would soon become the stage for their final act. The vast expanse of the Nevada desert offered no true sanctuary for Floyd Loveless and David Klein. The murder of Constable Adolph Burning transformed their reckless journey into a statewide manhunt. Law enforcement officers from multiple counties joined forces, setting roadblocks and patrolling the highways. Every stolen vehicle, every deserted road, became a thread pulling them closer to capture. But for Floyd and Klein, the cracks in their alliance had already begun to show. As the Buick sped away from Primo Station, tension filled the car. Floyd had confessed to shooting Burning, his voice devoid of remorse. The gravity of their situation pressed down on Klein. He was already an accomplice in theft and burglary, but now he was linked to murder. Klein's fear festered, feeding thoughts of self-preservation. It wasn't long before an opportunity presented itself. Somewhere along the highway, he noticed something glinting in the sagebrush on the roadside. "Look," Klein said, pointing. "There's a gun over there." Floyd, thinking it might be the revolver he had dropped during the scuffle with Burning, stepped out of the car to investigate. The moment his feet touched the dirt, Klein seized his chance. He slammed his foot on the gas, the Buick roaring to life as it sped down the highway, leaving Floyd behind. For Klein, the betrayal was an act of survival. Alone and stranded in the middle of nowhere, Floyd was suddenly vulnerable, his journey brought to a grinding halt by the desert's unforgiving emptiness. But Klein's escape was short-lived. Law enforcement officers had already closed in, spurred on by the murder of one of their own. Near Winnemucca, about 90 miles from where Klein had abandoned Floyd, a roadblock awaited him. When Klein saw the barricade, he refused to stop. Swerving onto the shoulder, he kicked up a thick cloud of dust and bypassed the officers, taking a narrow 7-mile dirt road. What he didn't realize was that the road was a dead end. Deputy Sheriff George Armstead gave chase, joined by Wallace Van Reed and Arthur C. Sebas, 2 men who were, ironically, rivals in the race for Humboldt County Sheriff. But on this day, their rivalry was set aside as they worked together to stop Klein. Trailing the stolen car, they fired 9 bullets into the Buick, but none struck Klein. At the end of the road, Klein found himself cornered. He turned the car around, speeding back toward the deputies in a final act of defiance. Van Reed and Sebas fired again, this time with shotguns. The windshield shattered under the hail of buckshot, and 2 pellets struck Klein in the cheek. Bloodied and defeated, he was dragged from the vehicle and taken into custody. Meanwhile, Floyd's time on the run came to an end not long after. A deputy sheriff in Elko County spotted him walking along the highway, his clothes dusty and his pace slow. Exhausted and unarmed, Floyd offered no resistance as he was arrested. During the drive back to jail, Floyd admitted to stealing the truck and shooting Burning. But when he was reunited with Klein behind bars, his demeanor shifted. He recanted his confession, refusing to say another word about the events leading to Burning's death. Back in Elko County, the grim news of Burning's death spread quickly. His passing galvanized the community, transforming grief into a call for justice. For Floyd, the stakes had never been higher. The partnership between Floyd Loveless and David Klein had crumbled, their fragile bond shattered by fear and betrayal. Alone and facing the full weight of the law, Floyd's fate was sealed. The boy who had once seen himself as untouchable was now utterly exposed, his actions in the Nevada desert marking the point of no return. The hunt for Floyd Loveless and David Klein was over, but the fight for justice was only beginning. For the residents of Nevada, the murder of Constable Adolph Burning demanded retribution, and the court system was swift in delivering it. Floyd's case moved quickly through the legal system. Though he was just 15 years old, the severity of his crime ensured that he would be tried as an adult. On September 12, 1942, Floyd was formally charged with murder. 10 days later, he entered his plea, not guilty. By September 28, his trial began, a mere 39 days after Burning's death. The courtroom was filled with spectators, their faces a mixture of anger and curiosity. Floyd sat at the defendant's table, his slight frame and youthful face a stark contrast to the gravity of the charges against him. The prosecution was relentless, painting Floyd as a cold-blooded killer with the stolen truck and his confession as key evidence. The defense, led by attorney Taylor Wines, their only aim was to save Floyd from death. They argued he didn't know Burning was a cop, thinking he was just some guy. The constable had been in plain clothes, and Floyd, fearing he was being taken back to the Indiana boys' school, had acted out of desperation. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Floyd took the stand. He wept openly as he described the struggle with Burning. His voice trembled as he recounted pulling the trigger, insisting he hadn't intended to kill anyone. "I thought he was just some man," Floyd told the jury. "I didn't know he was an officer." But Floyd's tears did little to sway the courtroom. The prosecution countered by emphasizing the brutality of the crime, the fact that Burning had been shot not once but twice. Adding to the weight of the trial was the narrative crafted by local newspapers. Publications like the Reno Gazette and the Nevada State Journal deliberately listed Floyd's age as 16 instead of 15. They had access to his records and knew the truth, but the distortion served a purpose: to make Floyd appear older, more culpable, and less deserving of sympathy. Meanwhile, David Klein's age was consistently reported accurately, always 15. The difference in perception was stark. Where Floyd was seen as a dangerous young man, Klein was portrayed as a misguided boy. On September 30th, after just 3 days of testimony, the jury returned its verdict: guilty as charged. Judge James Dysart, bound by Nevada law, had no choice but to sentence Floyd to death. On October 5, 1942, the sentence was handed down. Floyd Burton Loveless was to die in Nevada's gas chamber. The announcement of the death sentence sent shockwaves through the community. At 15, Floyd was the youngest person ever sentenced to death in Nevada. His execution was scheduled for December 13th, leaving him little time to appeal. For Floyd, the weight of his actions began to settle. The boy who had once seemed fearless now faced the reality of his impending death. Locked in his cell, he was no longer Lafayette's John Dillinger or the reckless boy who had defied authority. He was just a child awaiting execution. Taylor Wines filed an appeal, challenging the verdict and the sentencing. The argument focused on a technicality in Nevada law. The jury had found Floyd guilty of murder, but had failed to specify whether it was first-degree or second-degree murder. According to the state statutes, the distinction was crucial, as only first-degree murder carried the death penalty. The Nevada Supreme Court agreed to review the case. On April 21, 1943, the court overturned Floyd's conviction and ordered a new trial. The second trial began on November 15, 1943, and lasted just 3 days. This time, the jury left no ambiguity. Floyd was found guilty of first-degree murder. Once again, he was sentenced to die. For Floyd, the second trial marked the beginning of the end. He filed another appeal in February 1944, but his hope of a reduced sentence was fading. The Nevada Supreme Court upheld the verdict on August 16, 1944. His execution was rescheduled for September 29. In the months leading up to his execution, Floyd's demeanor changed. He lost the defiance that had defined his earlier years. He became quieter, more reflective, and even found solace in religion. He embraced Catholicism, attended prison masses, and spent his time reading and writing letters. The boy who had terrorized Lafayette was now a young man grappling with the weight of his past. But redemption, if it was possible, would not save him from the consequences of his actions. As the days dwindled, Floyd made one final request. He asked for roses to be sent to his grandmother in Indiana after his death. It was a small gesture, one that hinted at the child he once was, a boy seeking connection in the face of finality. As September 29, 1944, approached, Floyd Lovelace's life ticked away in measured moments. The 17-year-old, once defiant and volatile, now lived in a state of resigned reflection. His time on death row at Nevada State Prison in Carson City was marked by routine, prayer, and a futile hope that his sentence might be commuted. Floyd's final days were defined by appeals and denials. His defense team filed a writ of habeas corpus, claiming he was insane and therefore unfit for execution. It was a desperate attempt, one that delayed his execution briefly, but it failed to sway the courts. The Nevada Board of Pardons and Paroles reviewed Floyd's case but showed no inclination toward leniency. The governor, too, declined to intervene. Floyd's fate was sealed, and the realization weighed heavily on the young man. Despite the inevitable, Floyd found moments of calm in his final weeks. He became deeply involved in the prison's Catholic community, attending Mass and spending hours in conversation with Father Buell, the prison chaplain. He also joined the prison softball team, playing second base. For a brief time, his name appeared in the sports section of the Nevada State Journal, a fleeting echo of normalcy amidst the shadow of death. Floyd's final request was simple but poignant. He asked for roses to be sent to his grandmother in Indiana after his execution. It was a rare glimpse into the boy he had once been, a reminder of the family he had left behind. As the day of his execution drew closer, the prison prepared for the solemn event. The gas chamber, a small, cinder-block building on the prison grounds, stood ready. Inside, a steel chair and a pot of sulfuric acid waited for the sodium cyanide pellets that would release the deadly gas. On September 29th, Floyd's final hours unfolded quietly. The writ of habeas corpus had delayed the execution from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m., but there were no further reprieves. The hours crept forward as Floyd met with Father Buell, his spiritual guide in those final moments. No longer the defiant boy who had terrorized Lafayette, Floyd seemed to embrace the inevitability of his fate. As the clock struck 6 p.m. on September 29, 1944, the Nevada State Prison in Carson City fell silent. Behind its walls, Floyd Burton Loveless prepared to face the ultimate consequence for his crimes. At just 17 years old, Floyd was the youngest person in Nevada's history to face execution. The prison warden, a solemn figure of authority, entered Floyd's cell to read the death warrant aloud. The words were heavy, final, and left no room for misinterpretation. A physician stood by, listening to Floyd's heartbeat with a stethoscope, ensuring the young man was physically able to proceed with the execution. Floyd's demeanor in those last moments was quiet, reflective. His earlier bravado had long since faded, replaced by a stoic acceptance of what was to come. His only spoken request remained unchanged, that roses be sent to his grandmother in Indiana after his death. At 6:24 p.m., Floyd was led from his cell to the gas chamber, escorted by guards and Father Buell, the prison chaplain. The walk was short, just 13 steps, but it felt eternal. The cinder-block building loomed ahead, its modest exterior concealing the grim machinery of death within. Inside, the gas chamber was stark and clinical. A steel chair awaited Floyd, fitted with leather straps to secure his arms and legs. Floyd was seated and restrained as the prison physician placed a stethoscope against his chest, a final check to confirm his life before the cyanide pellets were released. The room outside the chamber filled with witnesses, journalists, prison officials, and a few members of the public who had been granted access. Their expressions ranged from morbid curiosity to somber resignation as they prepared to watch the boy pay for his crime. At 6:27 p.m., the executioner released the sodium cyanide pellets into a vat of sulfuric acid beneath Floyd's seat. The chemical reaction was immediate. White smoke filled the chamber, curling upward in ghostly tendrils. Floyd, following the instructions he had been given, inhaled deeply to quicken his death. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the faint sound of the gas hissing through the chamber. Floyd's body convulsed briefly before becoming still. Outside the chamber, the physician monitored his heartbeat, waiting for it to cease entirely. At 6:29 p.m., just 2 minutes after the gas filled the room, Floyd Burton Loveless was pronounced dead. The execution was swift, clinical, and final, a stark contrast to the chaos and violence that had marked Floyd's short life. After his death, Floyd's body was transported back to Indiana, where it was laid to rest beside his mother in Fairhaven Cemetery in Mulberry, Clinton County. His father and brother were buried elsewhere, their lives having diverged from the boy who had become infamous. Floyd Burton Loveless was laid to rest in Indiana, far from the desert sands of Nevada where his short life had come to its tragic end. His grave, placed beside his mother's in Fairhaven Cemetery, marked the conclusion of a story marred by violence, loss, and choices that spiraled out of control. But for those who had followed his case, from the residents of Lafayette to the lawmen of Nevada, his death raised as many questions as it answered. Was Floyd truly irredeemable, or was he a boy failed by the system meant to rehabilitate him? Floyd's life was shaped by misfortune from the start. The death of his mother, Hazel, when he was just 3 years old, left a void that no guardian or institution could fill. Raised in the isolation of Clark's Hill, Floyd's formative years were defined by abandonment and rebellion. By the time he was a teenager, his brushes with the law had escalated into a full-blown crime spree that left Lafayette terrified and grieving. The Indiana Boys' School, which could have served as a place of reform, was instead a harsh and brutal environment. Its reputation for violence, neglect, and abuse created a breeding ground for further criminal behavior. Floyd's escape from the school set in motion a chain of events that led to murder, betrayal, and his eventual execution. For Constable Adolph Burning, Floyd's victim, the tragedy was equally profound. A dedicated lawman who had served his community for 26 years, Burning's death was a sobering reminder of the dangers faced by those who uphold the law. His murder left a scar on Nevada's collective memory, a life lost in the line of duty. David Klein, Floyd's accomplice, was spared the death penalty. By cooperating with law enforcement and testifying against Floyd, he avoided the same fate as his friend. Held in federal custody for interstate motor vehicle theft, Klein's story faded into obscurity, a sharp contrast to the infamy that followed Floyd to his grave. Floyd's execution at the age of 17 ignited debates about justice, punishment, and the treatment of juvenile offenders. Nevada's legal system had treated Floyd as an adult, ignoring the complexities of his youth and the circumstances that shaped him. His age, repeatedly misrepresented in local newspapers, further blurred the line between boy and man. As years passed, Floyd's case became a cautionary tale. It was a reminder of how easily a life can unravel when left unchecked, and how a single act of violence can ripple outward, touching countless lives. In the end, Floyd's story is not just about crime and punishment. It is about the failure of society to catch a troubled boy before he fell too far. It is about the cost of neglect, the consequences of desperation, and the thin line between victim and perpetrator. A boy too young to vote, yet old enough to die, Floyd Burton Loveless left behind a legacy of questions. Questions about justice, about accountability, and about the choices that define us all. His story, though long ended, lingers still, a haunting echo of a life that might have been different, if only someone had intervened in time. Subscribe now for more true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.